The night I found out, I was standing in the kitchen making spaghetti. That's the part nobody tells you about. How ordinary the moment is right before your life splits in two. I had water boiling on the stove. I had garlic bread wrapped in foil sitting in the oven. I had a glass of Pinot Grigio on the counter, because it had been a long Tuesday, and I'd been on my feet since 6 in the morning. And then my husband's phone buzzed on the kitchen island, and I glanced over without thinking, the way you do when you're just existing in the same space as someone, and I saw her name. Not just her name, the message. I won't repeat what it said, but I will tell you that I stood there with a wooden spoon in my hand for what felt like a very long time, and the water boiled over, and I didn't move. His name was Dennis. We had been married for 23 years. I was 52 years old, standing in a kitchen I had chosen the countertops for, in a house I had helped paint every room of, and I had just found out that the man I built my entire adult life around had been seeing someone named Christy for the better part of 2 years. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I turned off the burner, poured the wine down the sink, and I sat down at the kitchen table and waited for him to come home. He walked in at 7:15. He was surprised to see the lights dim and the food unfinished. He said, "What happened to dinner?" I slid the phone across the table. He looked at it, he looked at me, and the first words out of his mouth were, "It's not what you think, 23 years. That was the best he had." I asked him to sleep in the guest room that night. He did, which told me everything I needed to know about how guilty he was. We didn't talk much that week. I went through the motions, work, groceries, laundry, while something inside me was very quietly falling apart. I kept thinking about all the times he'd come home late and I hadn't questioned it. All the weekends he said he was golfing. The conference in Atlanta that I now understood was not, in any meaningful way, a conference. At the end of that week, I told him I wanted a separation. He cried. He said he'd made a terrible mistake. He said it was over with her, that it had been over for months, that he would do anything, and maybe another version of me, a younger version, a more frightened version, would have believed him. But I was 52 and I had spent 23 years making myself smaller in ways I hadn't even noticed until that moment. And something in me had gone very still and very certain. I said, "I need you to find somewhere to stay." He left 2 days later with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. And then I was alone in a house that suddenly felt enormous and expensive, and like a question I didn't know how to answer. Here's what people don't understand about leaving a long marriage. The logistics are staggering. I had been a school librarian for 18 years. I made decent money, but not the kind of money that covers a full mortgage on a single income in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. Dennis had been the higher earner. We had joint accounts, joint debt, a joint life that was now being unwound thread by thread. I sat down with a legal pad one night and tried to map it out. The mortgage, the car payments, the utilities, my daughter's student loans which we had co-signed, the credit card with the balance I didn't want to look at directly. I was not going to be able to stay in that house, not alone, not right away. My first call was to my sister Wanda. Wanda is 4 years older than me, and lives about 40 minutes north, in a house with a finished basement that she uses mostly for storage and her husband, Gerald's model trains. She has a pull-out sofa down there and a full bathroom. I had helped her move into that house. I had watched her kids on weekends when they were small. I had been the one she called when Gerald's mother passed, when her youngest got into trouble at school, when the basement flooded in 2019, and she needed someone to help her pull up wet carpet. At 11 o'clock at night. When I called her that Thursday evening, she picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened. About Dennis, about the messages, about the separation. She made the right sounds. "Oh my God, I can't believe it. How long has this been going on?" She asked if I was okay. I said I wasn't sure yet, and then I took a breath, and I asked if I could come stay with her for a little while. Just until they figured out the finances. Just until I could find an apartment I could actually afford on my own salary. There was a pause. It wasn't long, maybe 3 seconds, but I felt it. She said, "Oh Marlene, I don't know. Gerald is really particular about the space down there. You know how he is about his trains, and the sofa isn't really. I mean, how long are we talking?" I said maybe a month or 2, maybe less if I could find something quickly. Another pause. She said she'd have to talk to Gerald, she'd let me know. She never called back. I waited 4 days. I texted her once, she said they were still thinking about it, I waited another 3 days. Nothing. I called my brother Keith. Keith is the youngest of the three of us, lives down in Cincinnati with his wife Patrice. And they have a 4-bedroom house with a guest room that sits empty except for when Patrice's mother visits twice a year from Knoxville. Keith answered and I went through the whole thing again. The affair, the separation, the finances. And I asked if I might be able to stay in their guest room for a few weeks while I sorted things out. Keith said, "Man, Marlene, I'm so sorry, that's just Dennis is an idiot." I always thought, well, anyway, listen, I want to help, I really do, but Patrice's mom is actually coming up next month and we've been kind of using that room for some of her stuff. I said I could sleep on an air mattress in the office. He said he'd check with Patrice. He texted me 2 days later. Patrice says it's just not a great time. She's got a lot going on with her own thing. I'm really sorry, sis. I sat in my car in the school parking lot and read that text 3 times. I had held Keith's hand in the hospital when he had his appendix out. I had lent him $2,000 in 2011 that he never paid back and I never mentioned again. I had driven 4 hours round trip to help them move into that house in Cincinnati. I had not once asked either of my siblings for anything. I sat there in that parking lot, and the thing I felt wasn't even sadness. It was something colder, something clarifying. I called my daughter Brenly. Brenly is 28. She lives in Portland with her partner, Ash, in a 1-bedroom apartment, so I wasn't calling to ask to stay with her. I called because I just needed to hear her voice. I told her what was happening. Not just the affair, but the housing situation, the fact that her aunt and uncle had both essentially said no. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Mom, how are you doing?" Like, really? That was when I cried. For the first time since the whole thing started, I actually cried, sitting in that parking lot at 4:30 in the afternoon, because my 28-year-old daughter in Portland had asked me how I was really doing, and nobody else had. She said, "We will figure this out. I promise. You are not going to be homeless." She started making calls that same evening. Here is what I ended up doing, because I want to be honest about this part, since I think people gloss over the unglamorous mechanics of starting over. I found a furnished studio apartment about 12 minutes from work. It was $975 a month, which was tight but manageable. It was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like someone had been cooking cabbage since 1987. The carpet was the color of old mustard. There was 1 window in the main room and a bathroom the size of a coat closet. I moved in with 2 carloads of things. Some clothes, my books, my grandmother's quilt, a coffee maker, and a set of dishes I'd bought at Goodwill for $11. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night, a twin mattress that came with the unit, and I looked around that room, and I thought, this is where I am. This is the whole of it right now. And then I thought, okay, I want to tell you about the months that followed, because the story doesn't end in that apartment. But I also want you to understand that those months were not a movie. There was no dramatic makeover montage. There were a lot of Sunday evenings eating scrambled eggs and toast because I was watching every dollar. There were a lot of Friday nights when I was so tired from the week that I just lay on that twin bed and stared at the ceiling. There were moments of real grief. For the marriage, yes, but also for the version of my life I thought I was going to have, the retirement plan we'd talked about, the idea that I would grow old with someone I trusted. But I also want to tell you what I did. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, a real one, not a friend of a friend. I found a family law attorney named Karen, who had 20 years of experience, and who sat across from me in her office on a Tuesday morning and said, very plainly, "You are entitled to half of everything." She walked me through the marital assets, the retirement accounts, the equity in the house, the joint savings. Dennis had made more money over the years, but I had contributed in every other way, and the law saw that clearly even when he hadn't. The second thing I did was open my own accounts, a checking account, a savings account. With my own name and my own login and my own direct deposit. I know that sounds like a small thing. But when you've been sharing finances with someone for 2 decades, having a bank account that belongs only to you feels like planting a flag. The third thing I did was sit down with the school district's HR department and ask about every benefit I had never bothered to look at. Supplemental retirement contributions, the employee assistance program, which turned out to cover 8 free therapy sessions a year. a tuition reimbursement program I hadn't known existed. I had been working at that school for 18 years, and I had been leaving money on the table because I'd always assumed Dennis's job was the financial engine and mine was the supplement. I started going to therapy. My therapist's name is Dr. Allison Kemp, and she is a small, precise woman who does not let me get away with anything. She asked me once, about 3 sessions in, "What did you want before you met Dennis?" And I sat there and I genuinely couldn't answer. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had been so young when we met, 28 years old, and I had pivoted so thoroughly toward the life we were building together, that I had never fully finished the sentence of what I wanted for myself. That question sat with me for weeks. I started a list. Not a bucket list, nothing that dramatic. Just a list on the Notes app on my phone of things I had quietly shelved over the years. I had always wanted to take a watercolor class. I had given up running in my 30s because Dennis found it inconvenient when I got up early on weekends. I had wanted to spend a summer reading through the complete works of Edith Wharton. I had wanted to have people over for dinner more often, but Dennis didn't like entertaining. I signed up for a watercolor class at the Community Arts Center, 6 Wednesday evenings, $28. My paintings were not good. They were genuinely, objectively not good. I loved every minute of it. I started running again. Just 20 minutes at first, down to the end of the block and back, my knees reminding me that I was 52 years old. By month 4, I was doing a 5K loop 3 mornings a week, in the dark before work, headphones in, listening to podcasts about things I found interesting, rather than the true crime shows Dennis had always had on in the background. The divorce was finalized 14 after I moved into that studio apartment. I will not pretend it was easy, or fast, or without moments of real anguish. There were negotiations that went sideways. There were documents I had to sign that made me feel like I was dismantling something, piece by piece. There were days when I wondered if I had made the right choice. Not because I wanted Dennis back, but because grief is strange and non-linear. And sometimes you mourn the life you thought you had, even when you know it was built on something false. But when it was done, here is what I had. Half the equity from the house sale, which Dennis and I agreed to put on the market. My own retirement accounts, intact and growing. No joint debt. A car that was fully mine. And a settlement that gave me enough of a cushion to breathe. I found an apartment, not the mustard carpet studio. A real 1-bedroom in a building with a courtyard and a gym. And a management company that actually responded to maintenance requests. I painted the bedroom walls a deep, warm terracotta, because I had always wanted a terracotta room, and Dennis had said it would look like a Taco Bell. It does not look like a Taco Bell. It looks like somewhere a person actually lives. I bought real furniture, not expensive. I have learned to love a good thrift store, and I have opinions now about what makes a quality couch. I have a reading chair by the window that is mine and that nobody else sits in. I have a kitchen where I cook what I want on the schedule I want. I have friends who come over for dinner. Real dinners where I spend an afternoon making something from scratch. And they stay too late, and we open too many bottles of wine, and I don't think once about whether anyone finds it inconvenient. Brenly came to visit 8 months after I moved into the new place. She walked in and looked around, and I watched her face do something complicated, taking in the terracotta walls, the reading chair, the little gallery wall I'd made of my bad watercolors, the kitchen with actual herbs growing in pots on the windowsill. She said, "Mom, this is use," I said. "Yes, it is." We had a good visit. We cooked together and stayed up too late talking, the way we hadn't been able to do in years because somehow my house had never quite been mine in a way that allowed for that kind of ease. Now, about Wanda. Wanda called me about 11 months after I'd asked to stay with her. I almost didn't recognize her number at first because we had barely spoken. A few texts at Christmas, a perfunctory birthday message. She said she'd heard through our cousin that the divorce was finalized. And she wanted to know how I was doing. I told her I was well. I told her about the apartment, about the settlement, about the running and the watercolor class, and the fact that I had just been offered a part-time position as a department coordinator at the school. A step up that came with a meaningful pay increase. She said, "That's incredible, Marlene. I'm so proud of you." I said, "Thank you, Wanda." She said she hoped we could get together soon. Maybe have lunch. I said maybe. I said I'd be in touch. I haven't been in touch. Not out of anger exactly. I've done enough therapy to know that anger isn't what I'm carrying. What I'm carrying is clarity. The knowledge that when I was standing in a parking lot with 2 carloads of my things and nowhere to go, my sister weighed the inconvenience to Gerald's model trains against her own flesh and blood and made a choice. She made it freely. And it told me something true about who she is and what I am to her. And I have to respect that information even when it hurts. Keith texted me a few months ago. He said he was sorry about how everything went down, that he should have done more. I appreciated the message. I said so. I am not in a place where I need to perform forgiveness before I feel it, and I haven't felt it yet, not fully. That's an honest thing to say, and I'm going to say it. Dennis remarried last year. Someone he met online. I heard through mutual friends. I sat with that information for an afternoon, and then I went for a run, and by the time I got home and showered and made myself a cup of coffee, I found that I had very little feeling about it at all. Not bitterness, not nostalgia, not the sharp satisfaction of revenge, which I used to think I wanted. Just quiet. Just the sound of the coffee maker and the morning light coming in through the kitchen window, and the simple, sturdy fact of my own life. I am 54 years old now. I work at a school where I have spent nearly 2 decades building something I am genuinely proud of. I run 3 times a week and I am slow, and that is fine. I make bad watercolors and hang them on my own walls. I have a reading chair nobody else sits in. I have a daughter who calls me every Sunday evening, and a handful of friends who know how to stay too late, and a therapist who doesn't let me off the hook. I have a retirement account that is mine alone, and a savings account that I add to every single month without fail. A practice I started when I was living in the mustard carpet studio, with $11 dishes and a twin mattress that came with the unit. I have a life that nobody gave me. I built it out of the rubble of the one I thought I had. And sometimes I think about that Thursday night in the kitchen. Standing at the stove with a wooden spoon, the water boiling over, the moment right before everything changed. And I think about what I whispered to myself in the parking lot of my school, the first time I really understood that I was going to have to do this alone. I said, I am enough. That's all. 3 words. Quiet and very certain. The way you say something you've known for a long time, but needed to find the right moment to mean. I am enough. And it turned out I was right.